You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking with Professor Edmund Phelps, who is a professor of political economy at Columbia University, and he's the director of Columbia's Center on Capitalism and Society, and he was also the winner of the 2006 Nobel Prize in Economics. Professor Phelps, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much for inviting me on.
I'd like to go back many years when you wrote a book called Rewarding Work. It was suggesting that the government should give incentives to companies in order to get them to hire more workers. It seemed like a good idea from a macroeconomic level, and now that we have a little distance since that book came out, I'd like to inquire if you've seen these ideas really implemented.
Yeah, I like that question. It's a book that's really close to my heart, and I've been so frustrated that it hasn't made bigger effect. Actually, it was adopted a couple of years ago by Singapore. The government's economists told the leaders, "Look, better be careful here. We're going to have a whole bunch of employees are going to be fired or laid off by." Employers, because the economy is now, because of developments in the world economy, we got to do something about this. And so a colleague of mine with whom I've worked sometimes on this subject, Hyun-Taek Hoon, must have gotten to them and told them about this scheme of subsidizing companies for every low-wage employee that they have on their books. Mm-hmm. And so that scheme was implemented, and it nipped the downturn in the bud, and a year later employment was actually higher than it had been when the scheme was introduced. It was just a tremendous success. But unfortunately, Singapore is the only country that tried it in a big way.
So it seems that that's the strategy that you're describing could be implemented in many ways. For example, just giving tax breaks to companies who hire low-level workers, or simply not put onerous requirements on companies when they do hire, let's say, low-priced workers.
Yeah, you might say the first thing you got to do is remove, at least temporarily, all those taxes on employment that somehow find their way onto the books. And yeah, but in the United States, which is a relatively low-tax country, the total payroll tax, the part that's said to be paid by the employee and the part that's paid by the employer, those taxes add up to only about 15% of the payroll, and
only, it sounds like kind of a lot.
Of the paycheck. and or the same thing. If the total tax paid is maybe 15% of the wage bill, but that's not very much. You need you may want a bigger subsidy than that, something like 20%, 30% at the low end, in order to have a really big bang.
Well, I had a discussion a couple of years ago in Israel. The government decided that every single employee should be covered by a pension plan, which on the surface sounds very nice. I think a lot of these sort of programs that governments develop have a good intention, but once it was implemented, I was speaking to other businessmen in in the neighborhood where I work here in Jerusalem, and they said, well, yeah, I fired the dishwasher and I fired the cleaning guy because it was such a hassle to add a pension plan. It was costing me more in time and effort, forget the money. And I think it ended up hurting the lowest earners of society.
Right, yeah. The economics is full of examples of the path of good intentions,
Is that similar to minimum wage as well, which also causes people not to hire someone who's just not worth minimum wage?
I think so, but the evidence on that score is very, very complex. It's hard to read. People can argue that the evidence on the whole shows no serious effect of the minimum wage, while other people say, "Now, wait a minute, if you do things right, you can see an effect." It's very, very complicated. That's one of the huge puzzles in economics of why there isn't a bigger employment effect of the minimum wage. Why it isn't why it doesn't have the big effect that economists are always saying that it would have.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily the case that the states in the United States that have a high state minimum wage are states with high unemployment rates. We just don't see that. We just don't see the costs of the minimum wage. It doesn't leap out at us from the data. Maybe one explanation is that when the minimum wage goes up, companies reach out and they say, the company says, "Well, if I'm going to have to pay this high wage, then for Pete's sake, let me go back and get that high wage guy who was so promising that I didn't take because his wage is high. If I'm going to have to pay the high wage anyway, then why don't I go for the high productivity guy?" Mm-hmm. So then you get a substitution from one kind of employee to another. That could be what's going on. So there's no effect on aggregate employment, but paradoxically, there's a negative effect on the employment of the low productivity guy.
Here's a difficult formula. We are talking with Professor Edmund Phelps, who is the director of Columbia University's Center on Capitalism and Society. He's also the winner of the 2006 Nobel Prize in Economics. We've been talking about some of the issues regarding work and how government policy can help to improve employment. Professor, I'd like to touch on something else that you've spoken about, which is referred to the Golden Rule savings rate, which I guess is how much a country should spend on present consumption compared to how much it should be saving and investing for future generations.
That's right. And this was a little finding that sort of put me on the map in economics when I was quite young. It was what I discovered was the following: that if you take a very simple model of the economy that had become popular in economics at the time, it had the property that if a nation decides to save more and in order to do that consumes less, it may or may not happen that sacrifice is repaid with possibilities of higher consumption in the future than would otherwise be possible. You think it's automatic. A penny saved is a penny earned. That if you cut your consumption by $1 today, you'll get that $1 back in the future. But the catch is that suppose you always save a higher proportion of income, then you always got to make back that past saving. But if you're always saving a higher proportion of income, no matter what it is, then the extra saving may not be repaid. Look, the idea is very simple. If a country is saving a whole lot, then it's going to drive the rate of return to saving down to a very low level. And if the rate of return on saving is very low, and when the fruits of that saving come in, you're only allowed to consume a much reduced proportion of it, it may be a losing proposition.
Are you referring, by the way, to savings on the national level, or?
Yeah, very much. Absolutely. National level.
As opposed to what every individual person saves for himself.
Right. That's right.
Okay, so it's very important that my clients who are listening to this show, because I'm a,
Yeah.
I'm a financial advisor in my real life, I only do a radio thing once a week, they have to
No
save.
client of yours, no matter how wealthy, is so wealthy that he can drive down the rate of return on his savings by himself.
Mm-hmm. But it's important that he, in fact...
Yeah, so now you pointed to a limitation of this analysis that I did. It only makes sense for a big country like the United States or China, something like that. Doesn't make much sense. Doesn't have much applicability for, say, Israel. Israel cannot single-handedly drive down the world real rate of interest by what it saves.
Okay. So when you did this research, which was really decades ago, the personality, I would say, of the generations was very different. A lot of times people accuse the younger generation of being very interested only in themselves today and having no ability to look towards the future. If you are dealing with a society that simply isn't interested in saving for the future, either for themselves or for their children one day, do the principles still apply?
Yeah, it still applies that it's possible to oversave. But I think what you're getting at is that in today's world, nearly every country, I think, seems so very short-termist. And everybody's trying to make a quick buck. Nobody wants to make an investment that might not pay off for 10 years. And we see saving rates of households at extraordinarily low levels in many countries, including my country, the U.S. And we see national saving rates. You know, when you add public saving to private saving, that's national saving. National saving rates are also very low. Would you believe that a lot of governments don't save? That's a joke.
I mean,
they're running deficits. They're not running surpluses.
If only we could print money, we'd be much better off.
Some countries are doing negative public saving that just about offsets the little amount of private saving that there is.
Yeah, it's a little bit frightening, and I think it is frightening, and I don't see a great solution for dealing with the political mechanism that makes it so that the politicians simply have no interest in solving the long-term problem, and every time they don't solve it, it simply exacerbates the problem for the next politician in office and for our children. Yeah,
the discussions of austerity these days suffer from just what you said. Nobody wants to be austere just for the sake of being austere. The idea of belt tightening is that you'll grow more productive and richer as the result of that, and it will pay off in the future. But people talk as if the advice to give up some of that overspending, people talk as if that advice is sort of punitive, or it's based upon some old-fashioned notions of sin or something like that. and that, people talk as if oh, well, we can't tighten our belt. We can't ask the government to give up these fiscal deficits because, don't you see, we'll lose jobs. Well, the answer is we won't lose jobs forever. The jobs will come back later. Maybe the jobs will be better jobs than they otherwise would have been. There might even be more jobs in the long run than there would have been otherwise.
I don't think that people are really upset about losing jobs. As long as it's someone else's job and not their own.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well,
the other guy pay the taxes. That's
but they are worrying about their own jobs too. Yeah.
That's where it's going. We have been talking to Professor Edmund Phelps, who is at Columbia University. He's the director of Columbia's Center on Capitalism and Society. He won the Nobel Prize in 2006 in economics. Professor, I'm very sorry, but we are just about out of time. It's really fascinating to talk to you. In the last few seconds, could you just tell us, how can people follow your work?
Well, I've got a couple of websites. There's the website of the Center on Capitalism and Society. That's www.capitalism.columbia.edu. Mm-hmm. And then I've got a couple of websites of my own. One is www.edmundphelps.com, and then I've also got a website at Columbia. You go into Columbia, and then you after the slash mark, you write tilde, the squiggly thing, ESP2, and that will take you to my professional website at Columbia.
Okay. Professor Phelps, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.